just if you'll call us to order when you think it's appropriate, and then we'll I'll go through my stuff and hopefully, as we've said, land the plane.
Right. So, all right. All right. Looks like we're all showing up now.
And Phil, can you remind me, you know, if we leave here today with a recommendation, is that a recommendation from the hack?
Correct. The idea behind that is that if is to sort of speed the process. So all hack members are welcome, all can comment. We've had plenty of discussion of it. You have been given the remit, or this subcommittee's been given the remit. So if we're all in consensus, we can just say, this is where we sit.
Okay.
And that sort of accelerates the process. Unless we get a very strong sense that something is not a consensus, in which case we don't do anything. But yeah, that's the general idea, that once it's been through this mill, we get it out the door and move it on.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think it's 10 after, and I guess we're over our technical difficulties hump. One would hope, and that we've got some folks here. We do have a quorum per subcommittee rules, if there's more than 3 of voting members apparent. So I'll call this thing to order and start by saying that Dan emailed a bit ago to Ridge and I saying that he has got to he has got some sort of dumpster fire he must attend to that sort of popped up. So his appearance, he is not promising to show up here. So I'll hand so a portion of that stuff he's handed off to me to lead that portion of the conversation. Before handing off to you, Ridge, I would point out that we have uploaded, just as a formality, the minutes to the prior subcommittee meeting. So if anyone wants to take a peek at those, so we can sign off on them, and then we can get ourselves on the road. And having said all that, let me actually right. Mm-hmm. So I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. That formality out of the way. As I said before, this subcommittee is usually chaired by Dan Rosenzweig and Ridge. Dan is unexpectedly unavailable. They had divided the material into 2 chunks. Dan has handed that chunk off to me. His chunk, having to do with the affordable housing plan implementation priorities. That'll sort of be our second discussion today. The first discussion is going to be a continuation of the it's going to be a discussion of the rehab and abatement tax ordinance, which is Ridge's wheelhouse. Sorry about that.
Great.
Weird happened to my video there for a second. So I'm
All
handing
right.
it off to you, Ridge.
Thank you. So here we go. I'm going to quickly recap where I think we are and then open it up for the one set of decisions that I think are remaining, but you all obviously chime in if you think I'm mistaken. So there we go. Just confirm that you all can see my screen. Yes? Okay.
Yep.
So recommendation, the goal of the program is to create incentives or benefits for affordable rentals and wealth creation for low-income homeowners. In terms of the incentive and the benefit, one of the questions that was raised last week was, well, what is the benefit? Give us a sense of context. And so I circulated this handy dandy table that shows that if you had an increase in value of $20,000 and all of that was subject to the exemption, you would get a yearly property tax savings of $190. Everyone is free to check my math. And if you made an improvement of $200,000, your income tax, real property tax abatement would be $1,900. So as was mentioned at the last meeting, this is not going to induce somebody or cover the gap of a major, renovation or enhancement. It's basically acknowledgement that, hey, you're adding to our affordable housing plan by doing this work, and we're gonna give you a benefit for doing that. So that's the sense of scale in terms of the benefit for this program. The amount of the tax exemption, I think we settled on it would be the greater of an amount equal to the increase in assessed value, or an amount up to 50% of the cost of the rehab, renovation, or replacement, subject to proof of what it cost you to do. So as long as your property value increased by more than 15%, which is kind of the baseline to show there was an improvement, it could either be the cost of the increase in assessed value or 50% of the cost that you put into the rehab. Hello? All right. I'm going to keep on going. The age of the existing structure that would be subject to this partial tax exemption would be one that is 15 years or older, which is the minimum established by statute. So the idea is to open this up as wide as possible if it's going to advance our affordable housing plan. The number of years that the exemption is available is 15 years maximum, which is also the maximum allowed by the statute. Again, opening the door as wide as possible. Recommendation is that the exemption be provided to those who are owner. There's an owner-occupied exemption aimed at low-income homeowners at the time of the initial application. So they're low income at the time of initial application, and that the exemption lasts as long as the homeowner owns the home. So if their income goes up, they still get the partial tax exemption because when they initially qualified, they qualified. For the landlord exemption, the recommendation is that it also be focused on low-income tenant. Sorry, that should say low-income tenant. The exemption lasts as long as the property is being rented to a low-income tenant based on initial qualification. So if a tenant is in there and they qualified as low income when the exemption was first applied for, and they remain a tenant, even though that tenant's income goes up, the partial tax exemption would still apply. This is verified each year, and that's Lisa Herndon's, consistent message that we need to have accountability in this kind of system. So the exemption would last up to 15 years, but needs to be verified each year that it is being that the improved property is being rented to a low-income homeowner.
Ridge, what's the threshold for low income?
So there we have it. That's the big question. So was that Frank?
Yeah.
So here this is really, I think, based on where we have all discussed, where the question rests is what constitutes low income and how do we calculate, the rent that qualifies under the landlord exemption. So before we get into that, Frank, because it's going to be the subject of the discussion that now follows, I'm going to ask Lisa I see that her hand is raised, and ask her to speak.
How are we going to ensure that students aren't taking advantage of this through a loophole
So
as
Uh,
tenants? As tenants,
that's a tough question. I don't know that I don't know a mechanism to do that. So,
you understand why I'm asking you this, right? Because
oh
their
yeah,
income is going to be low, and
Yep.
we already have issues with them encroaching on affordable housing, or sometimes taking up affordable housing stock. So I think this is a real concern. How we address it, I don't know, but I think it's something, this could be one of the loopholes I was talking about.
yep. No, I'm open to any kind of thoughts about, how you distinguish one low income person from another in a way that weeds out UVA students, but allows, other low income residents the benefit, or the landlord the benefit of this partial tax exemption.
Ridge, to that point, and this is, I'm regretting Dan's absence here, but and I'm not offering this as a solution. I'm kind of spitballing. But can we throw down an overlay, or suggest an overlay that encompasses the main student/university corridor as some sort of another set of as another requirement or something, because it largely the student problem is one of geography. And well, I mean, we still have the second, the geographical issue is they're close to the university, and that has got some special zoning requirements in it anyway. So can we make use of that? And I know that's not a perfect solution either. I mean, Lisa, that's not a Baby Ruth bar she just threw into the punch bowl there. Yeah, it's a real problem.
Yeah,
So,
maybe I'm sorry. I was on another call and I'm just joining in. But I want to say that, and maybe this is what y'all are talking about. If not, y'all can correct me. But I just saw a table of what the new low income is by salary, which just blew me out the water. I'm like, half of our folks don't. I think I spoke to Ridge about that. And this is one of the reasons why I say we really need to look at defining affordability, because half of our folks, I mean, I wish somebody had it and I was like, whoa, wait a minute, none of our folks make that kind of money, honey. But the new low income and the low income and low income it's very high.
Yeah, so
Yep.
actually, just before you jumped in, the discussion was, Frank asked, what are we calling low income? And we all said, and Ridge said, that's really up to how the AHP and how the whole plan comes together and those definitions. So we're saying low income as a placeholder for this program. We're not sure exactly how that gets defined for now.
Yeah,
It's a bigger question.
Really have to do something about that, because that number, it's going to leave a whole slew of people out. If we're looking, I don't know if I don't know how you're going to define it. I just wanted to make sure I put that piece in, because I'm a little concerned about that, because if most of the folks who I know, and even some of the folks who I know Habitat has have as homeowner, they're not making that kind of money. And those and those residents are homeowners. And would that leave them out because their income is not at that threshold. You know what I'm saying?
So I think, Joey, if I understand this correctly, though, it would be anything below an income threshold rather than anything above an income threshold. Does that make sense? So anybody earning $1 all the way up to 80%.
I think you're gonna need to spell it out.
Okay.
So-
Because normally, at least in the programs that we run at LEAP, it is everything that's below 80% AMI. So anybody earning, up to, gravel walking just up there, but I think it's like $80,000 qualifies. Or you should say $75,000, 74 to 95, right? Because we assume they're a family.
But that is, Chris, that is going to leave a lot of other people out.
So you're advocating for people that should be able to earn more money than that to be able to participate.
More money than 75?
Yeah.
No, oh, I get it. I think, Joy, let me see if I got what you're pushing for is that if it ends up that this is an 80% AMI program, that what's going to happen is the majority of the people who end up there are going to be between 70 and 80%.
Mhm.
And that doesn't move the ball the way we need it to move the ball. Is that what you're driving at? That we've got to be, yeah. And I think, I think I tend to agree with you on that, but the point I guess we're making is that the program says it needs to be focused on extremely low and very low income, the whole overall plan, and how that fits in and what we do specifically with this program. That question hasn't been answered yet. So it's sort of a blank placeholder right now, what goes in that box for this plan for now, because that's one of the things that Rory commented at the last meeting, is that a lot of this stuff gets siloed and we need to get coordinated. So hopefully the AHP.
So that's exactly right. And let me just go back to Eslisa's first question. I think the question of, can we limit this subsidy to landlords who rent to non-UVA students? I think that's a question for the lawyers. How do we do it? And I'm reluctant to do a geographic scope because, they're low income people who would like to live near the university because that's where they work. And so if you did an overlay that said, well, it's only available outside the proximity of UVA, then low income workers trying to live close to their jobs would be excluded. So I think what I would like to do is ask Lisa or some other legal beagle at the city's legal department, is there a legal way for us to say that you can't be a UVA student in order for the landlord to qualify for this exemption? And I don't know, I suspended my law license a long time ago, so you don't want to rely on me.
I agree with you, Rich. I think that's a great way to handle it, and it takes the pressure off of us. I also, back to Joy's question in terms of the 80% AMI, I understand why we would go up that high, but will we also have priority parameters in there? Are we going to give the lower income individuals priority? Would that help address your concern, Joy? She's on mute. Somebody unmute Joy.
Boy, unmute.
I am. Yes, it would help some, Lisa. I think we still need a little bit more sharp teeth in it, because some of the homeowners who still live in the 10th and Page neighborhood is who I'm thinking about.
Yep. So let me ask a fundamental question at this stage, because this question about who qualifies as low income, either as a homeowner under the owner occupied exemption or as renting as a tenant in the landlord exemption. The fundamental question, and that Rory raised this, is do we need to hold off on setting these parameters and make sure that it is consistent with whatever the overall affordable housing plan says is low income? Because here's our challenge. In the affordable housing plan, all 753 pages of it or whatever, there is a very consistent refrain, which Rory echoed last time, which is that these programs need to be aligned. These affordable housing programs, whether it's a property tax abatement program or a down payment assistance program for low-income homeowners, or any other, owner-occupied rehab assistance, which this is a part of, the affordable housing plan says those things should be aligned and consistent across each other. And we are ahead of the curve in terms of trying to wrestle with this decision of what constitutes low income for purposes of the affordable housing plan. And I'm wondering if we need to just make a placeholder in our recommendation that says this should apply to low income tenants and low income homeowners, however defined by the affordable housing plan.
Right. I guess
And
you were
then-
just much more articulate in saying exactly what I was trying to drive at, which is that really isn't, we can't really answer that question in this ordinance right now. We need to sort of structure the ordinance, and then, what low income is and how that gets defined is a much bigger question that the affordable housing plan as a whole has to grapple with to get everybody pulling in the same direction. And I think Rory's right about that, and I think the plan is right about that. And I didn't articulate that worth a damn, and I apologize.
No, you're fine. So Chris, were you going to say? Oh, excuse me.
I was just gonna
sorry.
say,
I agree and I disagree because
Yeah.
I understand, and I sit on the steering committee. But I also think that we have been working in this arena for an extremely long time, and we bring a certain expertise to this conversation, and that should be considered. And whether or not they take our recommendation, I think that we should still have a voice in that conversation and make a recommendation and consider some of what Joy is saying about her concerns. So I
Yep.
do think that we have a voice in that. I mean, they call on us all the time. That's why we're here. We are an advisory body. And I think that they don't have to agree. We could present a suggestion or a recommendation. I don't think that that would do harm.
Yep.
Well,
And
I
so,
absolutely, sorry, I absolutely agree with that. What I was saying is that is not something that if we just start sticking them into these individual plans, it doesn't really give a comprehensive oversight. So the purpose of the discussion of this ordinance, it's just low income, whatever that turns out to be. And then we will, of course, be making very strong recommendations. That's part of the implementation of this thing, which is in the second half of this, about overall programs. Here's how we think you need to look at affordability. And AMI is a sticky, problematic issue anyway, that has its own problems, particularly since everyone's sort of fetishistically attached to it on the federal level. And it's not necessarily a useful thing to use. And we're getting federal, anyway, it's a mess. But sorry, go on, Rich, please.
yep. No, so Chris, I see you have your hand raised.
yeah, I just say, I think, and then correct me if I'm wrong here, John, who's also on here and obviously is dealing with this, but by just saying 80% AMI or lower, we're capturing everything that, everyone who would be considered an affordable, at least by some standard metric, including, most utilized by the federal government for LIHTC funding, for example, right? Or that's all the things I currently use for my CDBG grant. I believe that a community development block grant that we're implementing on behalf of the city also. So I don't think we go wrong. The thing to get to Joy's point there is like everybody could still participate, right? We're not excluding anybody by saying 80%, up to 80% AMI or below. However, if you want to target a lower income population though, then you have to set another and prioritize them some well, then you have to set another, create some other types of incentive or limitations on things, right? So that then it gets a little bit more complicated. And I don't know if we want to start going down that pathway if we're trying to land today, or again, kind of utilize, I guess, to me, the best worst existing framework we have. So my suggestion would be, we move forward with below 8% AMI. I think that covers it. In the meantime, if that gets adjusted between now and when this gets in front of the council, it can be adjusted and the council can adjust it. But rather than discussing it, maybe we're not going down that pathway at the moment, but rather than continue to discuss this, I think we should finish it and move forward, even though it might be incomplete to a certain extent.
Well, I
Thank you,
just want
Chris.
you to know,
I-
Chris, I want you to know, that I hear you. I'm just voicing what my concerns of what I'm seeing. I'm not a homeowner, and I say yet. Don't know if I want to be at 65, but I'm not one yet. I see and I hear the struggle. I have friends who own homes in the Venable neighborhood, and they don't seem to think that they qualify for anything or any program that the city have, because for some reason, when they see or hear 80% of the AMI, up to 80% of the AMI, they don't think they qualify.
Yeah, so I actually disagree with Chris on this point, and I think the simpler direct forward motion on this is affordable means what the city's going to tell us, what we ultimately decide affordable means, and we don't stick 80% in here or anything else. It's how it aligns with the rest of the plan, and we just leave it as a placeholder. And we don't get trapped in 80% or less, because again, to Joy's point, that's what people are going to fix it on. It's not going to be 80% or less. It's going to be what the affordable housing plan defines as affordable or not affordable, and leave it at that. I think that's the path forward, because what we have seen with these 80% programs, and Joy is speaking anecdotally about it, but there's data on this, is that if you target the program at 80% or below, what you end up with is everyone between 70 and 80. And that's what weights it in, and that doesn't help us. So I would suggest that, this will probably skew a little higher on the homeowner side than very low income, just because owning a home does tend to skew you a little bit, but we just leave it where it sits and say affordable is affordable. And once we've got a clear definition of that, that's what will be dropped into this later. That's what I think.
That's how we want to move forward.
I see Frank has his hand up, and I've go ahead, Frank.
Well, I'll echo what Phil just said. I think you may end up with different standards for homeowners than you have for renters. Because he's right, you're not going to have a lot of homeowners below 50% of AMI, and you're not going to have the renters that are in the 70 to 80% category can generally afford market rate rents, certainly in a lot of places in the county. So I don't think we should wait and let the city determine what's affordable, because I think it's different depending on what the program is. And in this case, we're offering tax breaks to homeowners for making improvements. And I think we should be fairly direct about what the intent and who the intended beneficiaries of that are. And I think Joy's right. If I don't know what the statistical data would show, but my guess is at the lower end of the scale, we have a more acute problem. So why not target the lower end of the scale in terms of these tax benefits? Because they're going to be the hardest group to help, because the economics from a landlord perspective don't make as much sense.
Yeah, but I don't think we can deal with that issue in this ordinance. That's a larger issue of coordinating all of these programs and the various streams of what's affordable, what qualifies and what isn't, and a relook at that whole thing on a much larger scale than whatever we plug into this. So, I guess we can make a recommendation that this be pointed in certain directions, but in terms of putting actual numbers in it, I think that's premature for us to be doing. I think.
So it looks like there are two approaches on the table, and I'd like to just have us decide on one or the other, because if we do decide to go with an AMI calculation, there's another question that we have to ask ourselves, which is whether or not we have to look at the rent that is charged to that low income tenant. And so let's just first decide, do we just have a placeholder that says that this should be aimed at low income homeowners and low income tenants, as defined by the Affordable Housing Plan, and make sure that Phil sets up a separate meeting where we go into what is the Housing Advisory Committee's approach. And I think that may be what we're going to talk about in the next tranche here, about, having a discussion sooner rather than later about what constitutes affordable for all of these programs, this one and all the others. And we should just put a placeholder in this ordinance and say, let's have that discussion as a broader group, and then come back and plug it in to this ordinance and every other program that we're advocating for. So that's option A. Wait for a more clearly defined affordable, low income for purposes of the entire affordable housing plan. That's option A. Option B would be to pick an AMI now and say, this is what we think. We also think it ought to be consistent with the affordable housing plan as developed, but this is where we think this ought to be headed. So I cannot see the whole group because I'm shooting. So I'm just going to have us vote. Do you want to go with option A? Let's have a fuller discussion about low income affordable housing as a discussion, which Phil will tee up next. Or do we want to go ahead and put a AMI amount in this ordinance, in this draft recommendation to, or in this recommendation to City Council, subject to their view about whether or not they want to, that the council wants to wait on the affordable housing plan? Does that make sense? Yep.
Yeah, I hate to throw another option into the mix, but what if the tax break were a sliding scale based on your income?
Yep. I mean, the only challenge I see with that is that the amount of money we're talking about is so minimal that, I mean,
Yeah.
we could certainly do it. You could certainly have a tiered approach, but when you're talking about, a $200,000 improvement that generates a $1,900 benefit, and then you further scale that and say, well, it's $1,900 if you rent to 30% AMI, it's $1,500 if you rent to 60% AMI, it gets really complicated for a small amount of money.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it just seems like for this particular program, a tiered approach might not make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think Frank's suggestion is
Agreed.
actually a subcategory of A.
To wait and have a,
Yeah, I mean that's how it gets to how affordability gets defined and implemented under the AHP. It's a subcategory of that. Frank's suggestion of a sliding scale, because presumably there should be a whole, pile of programs, and some of them are going to be a lot more complicated than this one.
yep. So Chris, you got something to say?
Yeah, so I don't know, again, when we're trying to define this in the affordable housing plan, but at least the version that's in our Google Doc shared on page 55, it says this is how we should be targeting it. And what I just read there was only 20% of the funding is supposed to go towards 80% and below AMI. So let's say 70, 80% folks. 60% is supposed to go for below 60% AMI is supposed to get 30% of the budget that we are allocating out, or what gets allocated out. So again, that's 40, 50, 60% are supposed to get 30% of the total budget. And then below 30% AMI is supposed to get half the benefits basically that we're spending. Now, Rich and Phil, I don't know, and everybody else, if that's what you're talking about here when we're talking about the definition of this is affordable or not, but that's at least is what the targeting that was included in the affordable housing plan. Again, page 55.
A minute.
So is that answering our question, or is that not answering our question? I guess I'm not clear.
I don't think it's answering the question. The real issue here is in the midst of this ordinance rewrite, are we prepared to make assertive statements about how the entire city's affordability calculations should be run for all the programs? And my answer to that is no, because we need to do that work in a larger, broader context. How are we defining affordability? How, the targeting a percentage of the money as recommended by the plan is fine, but what we need to do is come up with a consistent guideline for how we're going to do the whole schmear. And this is a relatively small piece of it. And for now, just to say, and that's, I'm on the A variety of, for now, is in alignment with how the affordable housing plan puts this out. And we don't know what we don't know. I mean, by the time this gets organized fully and implemented, we may have an entirely different way of looking at those particular numbers. So I think we're really jumping the gun. We're just doing sort of the workmanlike portion of this, and the rest of it we can take a deeper dive in and apply it more broadly. But I mean, I think that statement on the AHP has to do with how much money is directed in different directions. And I don't even see how that really helps us, in that there isn't really any money going into this. This is a small, I guess, cost, but not forward.
Phil, why would we assume that every program will have the exact same AMI?
We won't, and we don't.
That's what I'm saying. That's what it
Yeah.
seems like you're saying, that we should wait for that.
What I'm saying is that how we define affordability and coming up with a common set of definitions for that based on AMI and other measures, and what we want to target and how, we need to all have a common vocabulary for that. And at this present, we don't. Defining what affordability is still a large question. And we all default to AMI because we default to AMI, but we need to, I think, have a broader conversation about what fits where, why, and how, and trying to do that in this ordinance, rather than having this ordinance there to apply those decisions later.
I disagree. I think that they're gonna wonder why we don't have one there, and why we don't have a suggestion. I think it's
Yeah, I
gonna raise
agree.
more questions.
Oh, no, we'd have a suggestion, which is consistent with the definitions of affordability as defined under the Affordable Housing Plan and implemented.
But I think those are going to be different. To Lisa's point, the different programs are going to carry
Yes.
different AMI. So why are we waiting for that? I think we need to determine who it is that we're trying to benefit, who needs to be incentivized, and at what AMI does that incentive really need to kick in? And I think we should make a recommendation about where that threshold is, and then they can figure out whether that fits well within the overall program or not. I don't think that's our job.
Oh,
So I'm gonna call the question.
Okay.
So option A is wait for a larger discussion about affordability in terms of the affordable housing plan. That's option A. Option B is we go ahead today and, as you know, as a recommendation to City Council, pick an AMI level that we are comfortable with. And so all those in favor of option A, waiting, raise your hand so I can see you. That's Phil and Joy. Okay. And then all those in favor of going ahead and picking an AMI now, raise your hand. That's Chris, Lisa, John, and Frank. So let's go ahead and Phil, how much time do we have left? Because I know you've got a whole thing to do as well.
Oh, 10, 15 minutes,
Okay.
something like that. I mean,
So I'm
gonna
gonna go to the AMI table and see if this is if this illustrates enough. You'll see in the middle, a family of 4 is kind of the default that most programs kind of look at, which is what is the area median income, for that family of 4. And then you can see the percentages along the left side. And so, do we have, oops, John, are you still voting, or did you have something to say?
Sorry, I never put my hand down.
Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something. So trying to land this part of the plane, when we're talking about, let's start with the homeowner. For a homeowner to qualify for the partial property tax exemption for improvements they make to their home, do we have a consensus on what that AMI should be? Looking at this chart.
I think for a homeowner, it should be 80%, in my opinion.
That was John.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm on the fence between 60
10 to
and
30.
80. John, can you give me your thoughts on 80? Because
Um,
I'm highly persuadable, I think, to either one.
I think when we're looking at a homeowner, it should be 80. Because I mean, we're looking at families that may just barely be able to afford to purchase a home, and they're looking to make these renovations to that home. And they're still considered low income if we're looking at any HUD scales. I think when it becomes a renter is a little bit different because we need to incentivize units being available for lower AMI families. So maybe it should be at 60, but for a homeowner, I believe in giving opportunities, especially opportunities to increase their equity for their family later on down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I see that point, and I actually, to a large point, agree with it. The question circles back to joy, which is, do we end up with everybody at the applicant pool is everybody from 70 to 80% AMI for that. But on the other hand, I mean, the threshold really is 57,000, 57 to 74, that difference between 60 and you're right, even a relatively inexpensive. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm persuadable on that. I mean, part of me wants to say 60, but I suspect you're probably right.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you feel. I'm going back between 60 and 80.
But I mean, my way to look at that is, okay, well, if we go to 60, that means that means a family making $60,000 a year is out. And that's $30,000 per full-time,
Unlikely to do it. I mean, again, Phil, you're the mortgage broker. How much can the 60K annual salary afford? Can they afford a mortgage on a $300,000, $350,000 house?
well, I mean, the answer
I mean,
to that is,
I think we should also think about people who've inherited houses.
that's my point. It's not much the new purchase. The folks who can afford to buy a house in the city of Charlottesville who make $60,000 a year, that's a real stretch for any sort of single family detached house. But it's certainly possible. But yeah, I mean, again,
I think I'm with you, John, on the 80%.
yeah, I think I'm talking myself into the 80% every time I open my mouth here. I just needed John to give me a little push.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there any issue with having the rental AMI being lower than the homeowner AMI?
I mean, there's no problem statutorily with having them be different. It's just really what we want, what we're trying to achieve.
I think
I
that
think the
makes
homeowner,
sense, being the renter, being a lower AMI.
So let's go to that. So it sounds like we had consensus from the majority that 80% or less AMI for homeowners would qualify for the partial tax exemption. And then now let's focus on what is the AMI of the tenant to qualify the landlord for the partial tax exemption if they rent to a low income tenant. And I will once again throw the chart back up there. And then we have one more question after that. And then I think we're done with the ability to make a recommendation. So here's again the chart of AMI. When you're talking about incentivizing rentals to low income tenants, do we have a consensus on what AMI we should choose for that purpose for this ordinance to make a recommendation to City Council?
I don't think it should be over 50. 50 equates at 30% to $1,171 a month in rent. That's tough to find anywhere in the city these days for a family of four.
Yeah, I think I agree with Frank on that. I think 50 is, you look at the family of three, that's say 2 children and an adult, total income $3,500 a month. That's, yeah. I think if we're gonna push it down, I think if we're gonna push it down on the rentals, we need to, I mean, 50 needs to be our top, but
Joy, I see you shaking your head.
I'm gonna always be the minority. I don't know. I don't know. Mr. Say,
Does not knock them out from also having use of subsidies, correct? The tenant could also have subsidies.
oh,
wraparound.
absolutely. Yeah, they're all supposed to work
They're
together.
probably gonna have to have it at that. Yeah. I'm fine with the 50%.
So we got, John, did you say 50%? I can't recall.
Well, I said 60%, but I'm fine with 50. My only concern is I worry if you add some of these restrictions, less individuals will want to do it. That's always my concern of making sure that it's still enough on the plate for the owner, but we're also still making sure that there's a benefit that transfers over. I know 80% doesn't do it because everyone will only do 80. We're seeing that in the SGP process. All of the units are being built out at 80%, and they don't even qualify for a voucher. So we're looking at Darius Central, and all of the units that they're saying are affordable, we can't place a voucher on them.
Yeah.
Which is a problem. So I know 60% we can do that. So that was my reason for throwing the 60 out, but I'm fine with 50 as well.
Well, let's keep in mind, and that if we put it at 50, that's the tenant's income. That has nothing to do with the market rent that gets charged. So actually we could, in a backwards way, drive landlords, this is one of the carrots of several, and say, hey, if you do this, yeah, that's at the 50% level, you're getting the subsidized rent and full market rent.
Chris, where were you at 50?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Well, I mean, it seems like we have a consensus with 50, with Joy giving her strong no. And I think this will be further addressed in the affordable housing plan. But in order to put some numbers in this particular ordinance, I think we got 80 for homeowners, 50% for tenants. And then there's one last question, which goes to what Phil was just asking about, which is, do we also need to say that the landlord is not just renting to a low-income tenant, but is charging an affordable rent, either a flat rate, like no more than $400 a month per room. So, two-bedroom apartment would be $800, or a percentage of that low-income resident's actual income, using the statutory definition of affordability as modified by Sunshine last time, which was 25%. So we're going to rent to low-income tenants. Now, do we establish a rental amount that the landlord is the maximum they can charge? The downside of doing that, as Phil just mentioned, is if they charge market rates, then a Section 8 type program could make up the difference, so that landlord is still incentivized to make that rental, make that rental to that low income individual. But that's the last question. Do we also look at the income of the tenant in order to establish an amount of the rent that the landlord can charge? And in the last 3 minutes that we have, let's open the floor.
I think that's the only way you can do it. If you don't do it that way, then you're going to have a lot of families that can really only afford $600 in rent with $13, $14 more monthly rent payments. And we can't guarantee a voucher can be attached to it, which is why you have to have that 25%, which is a good number, because what a lot of people don't understand is the amount that HUD says you can charge for a 4-bedroom might be $19.61, but that doesn't take into account the utilities.
Right.
And HUD looks at all of that. And so when a landlord sets their price, they're only looking at that large number and they're not taking anything out of it. So a lot of those units don't qualify.
Yeah, so we would say that the provision to follow this along would be to look something like the rent directly charged to the tenant could not exceed 25, 28, 30, whatever number we're using, directly charged to that tenant. Yeah, is that sort of what we're driving at? And if so, I mean, I think that I agree with John that that's I don't know if it's the only way to do it, but it's the only way that leaps to mind to do it. Because if we do it by start putting dollar amounts in for size or whatever, that's a backdoor to rent control, and that ain't happening. Not in this ordinance. I mean, it may happen, but it's not certainly not happening in this ordinance.
To
I'm
John's
fine with
point,
percent
Sorry.
of income. I think that's a straightforward approach. It matches what HUD allows.
to John's point, I think we need to be careful that we're not creating an unintentional disincentive. So the tax break we're giving them doesn't amount to that much money. If you're the landlord and you're now deciding, gee, should I make the $100,000 improvement? And the maximum rent I can charge isn't going to cover the cost of the tax break that I'm being given, then why would you do it?
And I think the discussion last time was that there is this particular tool in the toolbox is not going to be the deciding factor about whether somebody, builds and rents to an, affordable. That's why I changed it from incentive to benefit. I mean, it rewards people who are willing to rent to low income homeowners and cap the amount of rent they can charge. It is not going to fill the gap. This particular tool in the toolbox is not going to fill the gap between what they could charge and what market rate would allow, and is not going to finance the improvement. So it's just something else to add to say, good job, and we recognize what you're doing and we appreciate it, and we're going to give you a partial tax break as a result. And this is just one small tool in the toolbox that we're using to encourage that kind of rental.
And I will also add, the housing plan called out for rental rehabs. So also being able to potentially tie dollars from a rental rehab to this is also a solution that gets us there. Because if you look at that $950 over 12 months, it's only $80. But if you can tie in a $20,000 or $30,000 loan that's converted into a grant over a certain amount of time based upon affordability at a certain rate for certain years, that may get us there for some people that want to do the right thing anyway.
And I think that's a good segue to Phil's part of our discussion about how this and all the other pieces of the affordable housing plan come together. What I've heard is that we're going to, in order to qualify for the landlord exemption, you have to rent to a tenant who makes no more than 50% of AMI, and you can charge them no more than 25% of their income in rent. And then, Joy, that'll be subject to further discussion as the whole housing plan starts to come together, but it at least gives us something to move forward with here, and then we can continue our advocacy to say deeper affordability, more incentives, et cetera, and see how all the different pieces fit together. So that's what I've heard, and that's what I'm going to write up and circulate. And I think that what we'll do is we'll take all of this, and I did a markup of the actual ordinance, but we'll actually convert it into a narrative, a narrative discussion that we will forward to City Council as a recommendation. And the markup can just be an indicator of how you could do it within the context of the current ordinance, which has other bells and whistles that are important for this kind of program. Chris, do you have something to say before we exit?
Yeah, sorry, just Rich, that process, all that you said sounds fine to me. I would just say, please note this last point on limiting what the landlord can charge is not a consensus agreed to.
Yeah, no, yep. So,
yep. But disagree with that.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. So, yep. So I don't think we got unanimity on either one of these points. I think we got a majority view that this is the way to go. It's a recommendation, and unless Phil, unless there's some rule about consensus, I mean, I just don't quite know what to do when you have dissenting opinions.
Well, not to argue with this example, but I don't think we're saying you can't charge rent of more than X dollars, that you cannot charge the tenant directly X dollars. This still leaves the opening for other subsidies to coordinate. I mean, that's the whole point, to coordinate. So so you can theoretically charge a market rent. And the incentive there is that you get your full market rent. With a 50% AMI person, you get this additional break. That was my understanding of what we were saying, not that the total rent charged must be below X dollars. It's just that the tenant can't be charged more than X dollars directly. Having said that, I mean, if we've got, we don't have to have unanimity on this. So, if we've got a majority of the voting members saying X, that's what we're moving forward with. So we don't have to have unanimity.
Who has the burden of income verification, Ridge?
So there's already an income verification process in the city that we thought we would just, adopt for this purpose.
Okay.
Anyway, so that was the thought. I mean, Jason and Jeff Davis from the city, who've been wonderful in all this process, are willing to talk through with us where there are other income verification requirements in the city and use the forms that they use for this purpose. So there's a lot of administrative stuff that needs to support this, that will need to be spelled out when the staff gets a hold of this, and there's a staff memo that says, how do we verify the cost of the improvements if people want to go that route rather than the value increase. I mean, there are some details that I think are beyond the scope of the hack that we will address. And Chris, I think for Chris and Joy, I will go ahead and make a note in the recommendations that there were other views. For Joy, it was more deeply affordable for I think it was specifically on the renters. And for Chris, it was, not limiting the amount of money that can be charged as rent. And we'll just make a note of that so that it's not lost.
And homeowners.
Say it again now, Joy.
Mine was both for renters and home.
And did you have a number, or did you just want to say make it more deeply affordable?
More deeply affordable.
Okay. All right. I'll make those notes and write this up as a narrative. And then we'll move it on to the next phase of the process. So I thank you all for your help and attention. And I am now done with this, almost done with this task. Lisa.
This is the narrative. This is not the document, because you redlined through some of the documents where I do have questions. We don't need to address it right now, but I do have questions on the specific language in the document. So we can move forward, because you're talking about creating a narrative. I totally agree with the narrative. Yep.
And the redlining was really just for me to try to conceptualize. It was just easier for me to figure it out with the red line. But I think the attorneys and others are going to have their way with how to write the ordinance itself.
Yeah, we've used this red line method before and have presented the revised ordinance or rule to the city attorney's office, and they promptly sort of chuckle to themselves and rewrite it more eloquently. It's just sort of like to point.
I understand that, but you're taking out language that can have a different interpretation of this policy. I know we're having the narrative, and did we even vote on whether or not to remove the $50 fee? Because that's redlined out there too. Because that was supposed to be for specific according to staff.
Right.
Those were
we did not
just about what the attorney can reinterpret. When you take specific language out, you're altering the meaning of the ordinance. So it wasn't just that simple, which is why I was raising my hand.
So I think we sort of came around to a conclusion on the fee, which was if we're pumping $10 million a year into affordable housing programs, that, does this fee belong there or not? And the conclusion was, I think from the hack, I don't know.
Well,
Was
yeah,
that
I mean,
sort of-
I thought
yeah.
there was a consensus that we not charge a fee for people
Yeah,
to
that-
participate in this.
Is that in
Yeah.
the minutes? Because I don't remember that. I remember us having a discussion. I don't remember we actually voted on it. And also, if we're going to go down this road, I had a question about, so if an owner moves, they lose the exemption, right? But if the owner decides to become a landlord, will they have to go through the whole process again? Or is there a grace period for when they can find a tenant that fits those criterias?
Oh, so they improved their home, but now they're going to they used to be owner occupied, but now they're going to rent.
Yeah,
what you're saying?
they could upgrade into a market value home, but they still want to have the benefits of adding affordability, home ownership, stock to the rental market. So are they allowed to move out and then have that be and still get the benefit? Is there a
That's
grace?
So
a
if they're at
good-
75, if let's say person X redoes their house for 70 grand worth of
They meet all
improvements.
the criteria.
Right, they meet
Is
all the
there-
criteria as a homeowner. And then they say, after some period of time, say, you know what, I want to make this a rental. What happens? And I guess, I don't
In
know
the
if I have a.
ordinance, it says that it will expire, their qualification will expire. I'm saying, is there a grace period in between them finding a tenant, or will they have to restart this process all over?
Right, and I think that there isn't a grace period, that there isn't a process to restart. If I think the direct line on this would seem to me, and this is where staff would jump in, right? Where you'd say, all right, if you're moving out, and whatever exact time period to be determined, whatever, if there is a tenant that if you get a tenant in at 50%, that continues, I would assume that there would be I mean, just practically, there has to be a grace period. It's not like everyone checks on this every 20 minutes. So you've got some.
Well, I think we would, I think the language would have to be fairly explicit, because you've already done the improvement,
Mhm.
and now, so you're no longer the owner occupied. And so now the thing that you're renting, you haven't invested in improvement in that rental, you invest in improvement in your home ownership. So we would have to make it explicit that if you qualified as a homeowner, you could then transfer over to the landlord as long as you met the landlord exemption. And unless anybody here has an objection, I mean, it seems to be consistent with the thought is that we're trying to encourage affordability in both home ownership and rentals. I don't see any reason why we couldn't say, if you qualified as a homeowner, moved out, but are now renting to a low income tenant and charging no more than 25% of that tenant's income for rent, you would still qualify for that exemption to continue.
Mhm.
Unless I hear an objection from anybody, but I think I think we're trying to keep the door as wide open as possible for people to get benefits.
Can I ask another question? Why did we remove the term residential use on the document? That is being occupied by.
Yeah, that's the owner occupied piece, that it specifically defined it as being an owner occupied dwelling. So we were having a landlord. So it's not, yeah. It defines residential as shall mean occupied or designed to be occupied, but not more than one family. So that's basically residential use is single family, 1 unit house. And that's not what we're, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I mean, the up above, there is a thing that says it has to be used for residential use. It's just this definition of residential use that I struck was too narrow. It didn't include multi. Go ahead.
I assumed that you were doing it to allow for landlords, but I didn't see any additional language in there. So I was wondering, why was that taken out? Because it seemed to be more specific to make sure it needed to be owner occupied. But I didn't see.
Yeah, I guess that just removing it does that job, because it takes that, because if residential use, if you define it as this narrow thing, then you're stuck with just this narrow thing throughout the entire document. And we're saying residential use does not mean 1 unit. occupied by the family who did the work. It doesn't mean that. That's all that I think that's the strike that he did, right? I mean, is that what you were doing? Just saying that that's not what
Yeah.
residential use means. And that way you don't have to, every time residential use reappears, yeah, you've just changed the definition by taking out that narrow piece.
Okay, also, will there not be a limit to the assessed value of the property? Can
I
it
did
be
not
a
include,
$1 million home?
yes. If you're a low-income homeowner,
Right. Yeah. Let's deal with those issues first. Let's draw that one up. Here's your $2 million house. Right. Yeah.
Because it
So-
was in there, there was a limit in there before, and then you took it out. So I was just wondering why. And this stuff is not discussed in the narrative, which is why. And you said we're just gonna send a narrative, but the document is what they're gonna point to, not the narrative. So what was
So-
the justification for that? I just want some clarity, that's all.
So the idea is your grandmother handed you down a house that now happens to be in the toniest section of town, but you're still low income. You're still working as a stiff in a job. You're a low income person that happened to inherit from your grandmother, who happened to buy or own a place in what is now a very popular neighborhood. And the idea being, if you are trying to remain in your home and make an improvement to that house, you should get a benefit that increases your that helps you grow your wealth.
You see why I was asking that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because if your home is at a certain assessed value up to $1 million, you might be in a whole different class, but I understand what you're saying concerning assessed value. I have one other question, then I'm gonna let y'all go. Let's see if I can find it. Would this program allow a nonprofit to purchase a home and rent it out and benefit by multiple grants? While they do the renovation or after they do the renovation?
So they're trying to get the landlord exemption. So they would, if they're continuing to own the property, but they're renting to a low income tenant and charging no more than 25% of that tenant's, I mean, I think they're a landlord like any other. I mean, we didn't carve out different types of landlords. So the answer would be yes, they would qualify. And I don't know that we would concern ourselves with how they
So
afforded to make the improvements.
Oh, no, I don't think we should either. So this program would not kick anybody out from benefiting from grants, other additional grants, correct? It's not gonna
Right.
Correct.
cause
Nope.
them
That is
to
correct.
lose any benefits.
Correct.
That was all I had highlighted. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you.
All right. So I guess that turns us to part 2.
I
So
landed the plane, but only on one wheel.
That's right. That's right.
There was some scrapage as we hit the tarmac, but I think we got there. So thank you all for your help. And
Well,
your
thank you for your work on this. I certainly.
We're not gonna just rubber stamp it. We're gonna ask questions. We want to be engaged because we represent the citizens and all other people.
And you know it.
Oh, let me see if I can get into my sharing of screens business here. But meanwhile, all right, so let me sort of give before I start pushing buttons. So DCM Sanders asked from the hack to have a very broad list of implementation order. The idea behind this was to properly position staff resources such as they are, city resources such as they are, and try to stage this implementation of the affordable housing plan. There are recommendations for implementation in the plan, but of course, those are always moving targets anyway. And our sort of pitch to, in an ideal world, we should. So the idea here is we were looking to provide a series of recommendations on implementation on items in the affordable housing plan that can and should be done immediately, which means by the end of the calendar year, we've taken some sort of step on it. The second category is by the end of the fiscal year, next summer, and the third category being after that. And it does not have to be a very detailed list, but that is in advance of, once that task is accomplished, we will then return to the affordable home housing plan and sort of start looking more closely at each one of these programs and what they need for implementation. So this process here is designed to be a preface to that process in which the HAT will also be involved. And I guess we'll have to talk about how we'll stand that up. But in the meantime, what we're looking for is ranks of essentially number 1, number 2, and number 3, 3 buckets. And in the, why am I having, there we go, let's share a screen here. In the, that's all right, let's get to where we need to get to. So I will pull up first this memorandum, which I will pull up here and attempt to share. And nope, that's the wrong thing. Let's close that out. And then we'll close this. Pull this up. And there, sorry. All right. Everybody see this? Do we all have this as memorandum up? Okay, good. So this is the outgrowth of the last meeting on the 10th, where we started through this process and we took a look at the subsidy and funding pieces of this. Funding, there are topics of the plan is divided into some general groups: funding, governance, land use, tenants' rights, subsidy. We kind of covered the subsidy piece, but the homework was to look at that, look at the AHP in its whole, look at the recommendations found on pages 48, 62, 77, 99, as delineated towards the bottom of this thing here, and provide a list of what we think makes sense and what order to go in. And what I would like to do is sort of go through each of those sections and sort of get a sense of the 1, 2, and 3 for everybody. And then sort of take it from there. Does that make sense? Just to go through each one of these major categories? Okay, so that's what I'm going to attempt to do. And I will go back to, if we start at page 48, or the funding recommendations. And then, boom, share. Everybody read this? So, okay. So some of this doesn't really fit into the category, right? I mean, some of this we can't really call 1, 2, or 3. It is what it is. But to look at this, for example, the dedicate 10 million per year. Well, that's as soon as we I mean, we make that commitment now, but that's really kind of 3, right? Because we don't have the 10 million, for example. So anyone want to give any thoughts on priorities here as to what goes first, what goes second? I don't think we have to assign a number to all of these items. Some of them don't really fit. I would suggest an opener that the transparency piece is a 1, and we need tools for that so that we stand it up for everything else we do. So anybody have any thoughts on that?
I agree. Transparency is 1.
All right. Then
Yep.
I'm not sure if consistency and targeting we even rank. I don't think that fits into the, you know.
I've got a question for you guys.
Yeah.
The IAT, where does it fit in? You know, under these funding recommendations, scale, consistency, targeting, and transparency.
Right. So at the meeting on the 10th, we actually suggested to enhance the transparency that the HAT committee presents an updated IAT for formal adoption prior to the to next year's budget. So I guess that's sort of a 2, but that it does fit in, and that our deadline was to get it done, you know, before we get too deeply into next year's budget. So I'm not sure whether we call that a 1 or a 2 based on the timeline. Does that have to get done by the end of this calendar year, or does it need to be done by the spring? What do you think, Alex?
If it's gonna do with the budget, you know, it's gonna be included right now. If it's gonna be
Sooner is better.
for the 2023 budget. However, I think I'm not sure whether adoption of IAT by the City Council is necessary, since we have these recommendations already that says the city needs to commit $10 million, whichever way, every year for the next 5 years. You know, it's already spelled out. So I'm not sure whether requiring council to adopt the IAT is necessary. But the funding request definitely reiterating that for the coming fiscal year, it's in order.
So I would ask then, I mean, I think that the idea of having council formally adopt it, and the idea, I think, is that we need a transparency framework and platform that everyone agrees is the hymnal that we all need to be singing from.
You know,
So the idea being that the IAT would be part of that transparency piece, and it would be a formal acknowledgement that this is how we're being transparent, this is how we're tracking, this is how we're measuring. I think
in
that
terms of scale, the housing plan is already approved by the Planning Commission and endorsed by the City Council through a resolution, and that money is already there. You know, I mean, or that at least a good faith or action of the City Council, rather. You know, it's already there that the proposed $10 million per year over the next 5 years is under consideration. And of course, that depends on the resources, you know, going forward. But that's already acknowledged by the City Council.
Okay, so your real issue is having the City Council officially say, yes, this method of measurement and view or not, because that's what this is really about.
Well, you guys can include that, but I'm just voicing my own concern, or I mean, opinion, because at the end of the day, will be when we report, or when the city reports how the affordable housing plan is being implemented, we're going to be probably we're going to be including the extent of funding. In other words, if it's $10 million every year, council puts down $5 million, then we're going to indicate on an annual performance report, or whether it's 6 months annual, to the city council, that 50% of that objective was accomplished because $5 million was appropriated. You know, my comment basically is that I don't think council needs to take action on the IAT in order to be transparent or in order to be accountable, because this will be reported, you know, in terms of performance every year. And the amount of money that is supposed to be appropriated or provided every year for implementation is already indicated in what the city council approved through the recommendations.
Okay, I see your point. I really have this pointed more at sort of a constant moving and about moving thing about the transparency throughout the entire community and how everything is working almost on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis. But noted. All right. So, but for this page here, as we're looking at it now, getting some sort of transparency measure and figuring out and defining that seems to be a consensus of a 1. The targeting and consistency, I don't really think that fits into a priority of implementation necessarily. Then the dedicating of the 10 million, that really, what we're deciding there is what do we mean by dedicating? I mean, we're saying we're dedicating it, we're dedicated to it, but the money's not actually going to happen until the next fiscal year. Right? Do I have that right? Ridge, you have your hand up.
I actually think Chris had his hand up before I did.
Okay, Chris, you had your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, Chair, on this, you know, I think these are all just givens, and these scale, consistency, targeting, transparency are parts of the activities we should be prioritizing and telling the city to do, as far as my understanding and reading of what our homework was. And so in that, considering all that, for what we should be trying to do by the end of the calendar year, LEAP was, or at least myself, was saying you should definitely try to get the staff in place, which I think is pretty important to do, kind of, again, like you mentioned, transparency and targeting, et cetera, right? So get your hiring done and organizing, reorganizing done if that is what's needed. And 2, I will just say from an activity perspective, and obviously this is something that LEAP does, but you know, we would be prioritizing rehab energy efficiency, which gets money out the door quickly and addresses, I think, some immediate quality of life and reducing housing costs almost immediately for some folks. Obviously not all the money should be dedicated to that, but a portion of that should be. And that's considering, I think, you know, again, how you're prioritizing.
Yeah, I think you're going down a path that's on another page as far as the staffing. What I want to do is just sort of do it sort of organizationally to give city management what they asked for. But I mean, I think staffing's important, but I just want to sort of deal with it in some sort of consistent way in what we've got here so that we can go through it. Right. Although I agree with you, there are certain things that are absolutely a number 1 crash priority, but I just want to sort of get organized on it. So considering the funding recommendations on this page, it seems to me that where are we in a quick sort of assessment? And right now, I mean, having a transparency tool seems to be a priority, and then the scale is sort of a messy picture, and the other 2 are irrelevant, I think.
Aren't all these priorities equally? Didn't we approve them all as kind of equal priorities? I mean, I don't think when we approve this.
So it's not, yeah. So it's not that. It's a matter of, as engineering and launching this, knowing what we know now, what do we need to get done by the end of the calendar year? What are things that need to get done in the spring? And then what are things that are going to come after that? So that's sort of the chunks that we were asked to provide. So, Ridge, you had your hand up?
Transparency.
Whoops.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rich.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I agree that transparency is a top priority, but you know, I don't want us just to focus on whether we're shoveling money out the door. And in transparency, it talks about impacts, and impacts are related to the scale and the targeting. Like, are we actually achieving the objectives that we set out to achieve with the money that we're spending? I mean, obviously, you want to keep track of the money we're spending, but I want to know, did it actually help one of Joy's low income or extremely low income residents get stable, affordable housing? And so it really does go to what is required, and it's hinted at in the scale, but not with the level of detail that I think we need to have by the end of the year about what are we exactly trying to accomplish.
Agreed. Agreed.
I'm done.
Joy. Nope, you're muted. There you go.
I was just reading it just to be able to give you my opinions.
Gotcha.
So I'll come back to me.
All right. So is there anything else we need to discuss on this page? Again, I think that there's a consensus that we need some sort of transparency action tool, thinking about that, to have that stood up from the beginning so that when this starts to happen, we've got it. And obviously we're spending 10 million bucks. I guess on the consistency and identify sustainable and reliable source of dedicated funding, that's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 3, that's an ongoing continuing from now until the end of time.
Right.
So
Scaling transparency is what I'm looking at. If you want to say prioritize it,
right.
Consistency is important to me also, and targeting what needs to be done. But I agree with Ridge. Are we accomplishing what we say we're gonna be doing?
Okay, so we want to make sure measurement tool. All right. Good. Any other thoughts on this page? All right.
Is John Sales still on here?
Yeah, and I'm sharing screens and I can't see everybody. So Ridge, if you see something going on.
Yeah, John's still here.
Yeah, he's
Yeah, Joe, I gave my opinion on transparency being number 1.
okay.
I
Gotcha.
still question how far we are away with the city finding $10 million. But we'll get there when we get there.
All right. The next section of recommendations is the funding, the government recommendation piece. And I think that I'll channel Chris and say that, I mean, obviously getting a handle on city staff capacity is a #1 priority. And it sounds like we're already making moves in that direction with this 3-person department that's not a department yet that Alex has. But I'm going to be presumptuous and assume that that's really a 1, that is, you know, that we really need to sort of get a sense of how many people we need to do this and stand that up. Does anybody disagree with that?
No.
I didn't think so. A standardized and competitive funding process. I don't know if anybody has strong thoughts on that, but I think that's kind of a classic 2, that the money really isn't going to be there until next year. So we do need to do it, but it doesn't have to be done this calendar year. Does that make sense?
Well, I'll just say, Phil, with that, there is the CAF that still needs to happen and was prioritized in the original notes, right? So I don't want any recommendation at the moment that's coming out to say, no, you know, wait and not do the CAF.
Yeah, I don't think I'm saying that. I think that this is sort of a long range, clear to award grants and loans for affordable housing. So I think that's bigger than just the CAF. I think that's an entire process for everything.
Okay, that makes sense to me, but let's just.
Yeah,
these things
yeah.
goes- Let's make sure. we're
That
using
was
it.
my read of that, that it's not just the CAF. And then that leaves the other two pieces of the CAF committee and the hack. And I would submit that in the present environment, that both of those sort of default to a 3. Because we have a process for under the CAF for allocations now that actually works quite well, that can be used for this year. And that's one of our priorities, right? Get the 850 out there as quick as we can. And then reorganizing the hack. Well, once we've got a department that's fully up and running, once it's got its housing thing, once we've got plans run, what is the role of the hack at that point? That's the time to ask that question, not at this second. I mean, I think. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I'm not hearing or seeing any, so.
I'm okay with I'm okay with 1, 2, and 3.
All right, John, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, well, I guess my question is, I think at the last meeting, there was discussion about the CAF being on hold. How long is it on hold? Because we're talking about a long hold. I mean, it may end up being that new competitive funding process that they're envisioning.
Right. I think at the last meeting, to go back to that, was to immediately, that asks you, we're not going to wait on the process, immediately issue an RFP or NOFA for the current balance of CAF funds, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 to $850,000 to fund initiatives that have already, sort of been trailing, going on hold. So for now, for that assumption, that's get that money out the door.
Okay.
It can't.
I saw you were
Need to shut it down because I reset.
Okay.
Hello.
Sorry.
Yep. Anybody else got a hand? Ridge, I see you got a hand. Well, John, does that sort of address what you were asking, or did I get stepped on by Joy's rave or whatever she was doing over there?
It looked like Alex was about to respond, so I didn't know if Alex had something else to add.
Well, I think the city manager is considering that that particular line item, clear, transparent, and competitive process. So assistant city manager, probably in consultation with the city manager, so that process is now ongoing. And then I'm not sure how soon, that they will complete their evaluation, and move forward with publishing the RFP for the $800,000 or $850,000. But the relook of the transparency and competitive process is currently underway.
Okay.
So should we move that to number 1?
Well, I mean, I guess if that's our feeling of that's an overarching priority to get done this calendar year, my sense is that they may be looking at it, but I'm sort of, once again, I don't want to wait on redesigning that process that holds up for any significant period of time, pushing out CAF funds, because we have not had I think we've got the money that's sitting there now, and part of this is what money do we have to do, that's available for which to do things. But I mean, the city management can take it or leave it for where we're sitting on that. I mean, they can say, well, we've actually jumped ahead on this. Great. But I mean, I don't think we drop everything and prioritize putting together that long-term process at the expense, say, of moving forward on what we've got available right now in the existing process. I think.
What are you saying? You're saying to prioritize the staff and then do standardize and then do housing and the CAF as third?
So what I'm saying is city staff capacity would be number one. And then the standardized and competitive funding process, that's a 90-day turn to come to it to get that done by the end of the calendar year. And I just
Is that your
think
own assumption or is that something in writing?
that's my own assumption that but they might. But what I'm saying is certainly that is something to me that is a priority, and it needs to be done before the real money starts flowing through, and that starts happening later next year. So that's I mean, it's a priority. I just don't think that the impact of it and its need happens right now. I think it happens next year, so we've got to have it done early next year, not in the next 90 days. That's all I'm saying. John, do you still have is that a new hand up or is that your old hand up?
That's a new hand up.
Okay.
Can we just get clarity from the city, from city staff on the CAF process, the current CAF process, if it's on hold for this new process or if it would eventually go through from its former process?
Yeah, we can. I think that for the purpose of this discussion, in general, if we're going to give recommendations, I think the general recommendation is if we got $850,000 to spend on affordable housing, let's spend it. I think, but I agree with you. We need to get clarity on that, but that's farther down the road.
Do we have the person on the phone at the moment who can provide that clarity?
Great question.
Right.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've made a note to reach out, which I will.
Okay, I mean, this was one of our immediate suggestions from 9/10, right? So 3 weeks ago. I mean, shouldn't one of them be able to respond to us and tell them if they're going to get this done or not, so that we can understand and make our priorities?
No, because we didn't have a complete list of recommendations to make.
No,
So
in the memo you wrote on 9/10, it says here, unless, I mean, I'm assuming this has got everybody, the draft priorities that emerged were immediately issue an RFP or NOFA for current balance of CAF funds to fund initiative for 2 to 3 years.
Right. That was written in the wake of that first meeting. The date on it, ignore it. I mean, we're going to have a finalized memo. This was starting it because we were just getting the process started. If you follow me.
It just, sorry, Phil, but this is, I don't know about John, but again, Leap here is, this process normally happens, it starts like a month ago and we're still sitting here waiting. And in theory, this is, you know, housing is a priority issue for the city and that's why they're engaging in all this. And then, you know, they're not utilizing the funds that they have. Anyways, I'm sorry, I'm a little frustrated on this. I will shut up. And
Right. So you agree that that's a priority to get it out the door as fast as possible. Me too.
Can I say something just as an act of procedure and antitrust regulations, that we are not here to personally advocate for ourselves, but to discuss what is best for the community as a whole?
Yeah, and actually we've been having some chats about that. It is tough, but on the point of the Affordable Housing Fund, I think all of the stakeholders are going to generally be of the opinion of go now, go hard, go immediately. And I'm not, you know, is that an advocacy position? Probably, but I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it's an attack on interest. Not that I disagree with you. I don't think it's exactly an easy.
I think it's a slippery slope.
Yeah,
Phil,
I agree with you. I agree with you on that. It is slippery.
and we should.
Right. But anyway, Ridge.
I just very quickly, I agree with your timing on the Housing Advisory Committee reformation, but I agree very strongly with the idea that there needs to be a broader range of viewpoints. And I have valued my service here on the HAC, but I think if there are people out there that want to serve that have a viewpoint that's different than mine, that I would be happy to step back from the hack and let that seat be filled by somebody who can bring a different viewpoint to the thing while we're waiting for the governance to be changed. And so I do think we ought to be on the lookout for people of broader viewpoint. And then I would make, I would resign my seat and make it available to somebody so that there's a broader view as we head into this critical piece of getting the housing plan done. So I just throw that out there, and I think we ought to be looking for different viewpoints and not wait for the hack to be reconstituted to get that different viewpoint expressed.
Agreed. Slightly outside the scope of this exact conversation, but I don't disagree with you on it. John, is your hand back up, or is this old, or is this new? Sorry, man.
No, I'm sorry, it's old.
All right. Thank you. All right, we've just got a few minutes here, so I just want to, and I think before we get down to the last minute, I want to get through as much of this as I can. And then what I'd like from everybody is to go back to these things. And I'm taking notes, but shoot me your own 1, 2, and 3 for each of these pages. And if you feel you need to explain 1, 2, and where you got to where you got to, fine. And then I'll try to pull it together. So, anyway, okay.
Bill,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanna put this out there. I think Brenda may have mentioned it at one of the hack meetings. Today is the deadline for departments, to submit their CIP requests. So I know things that are related to housing. Some of them usually automatic submittals like rental assistance and what have you, all the commitments. So you guys keep it in mind as you compile this so that you can send it to Assistant City Manager as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, sir. Turning to land use, this is sort of a fuzzy one to sort of rank this way. I guess in the largest sense, and piggybacking on the meeting from 9/10, the consensus was, yes, let's get a map approved this year. Everyone sort of, and then obviously the zoning piece that falls behind that, well, that's not happening this year. So that's a sort of presumably that's supposed to start next year, right? So I'm not really sure. The rest of these are not really these are sort of overall goals, they're not programs. Any disagreement on that? I'm assuming no.
So what was the suggestion, Phil?
My suggestion was that for land use and purpose, these are not really organized as specific. These are recommendations for policy, but they're not specific program stand-ups. But that to the extent that we have recommendations on it, number one is get a land use map approved by the end of the calendar year, which my understanding is the Planning Commission also sincerely wants. And then the zoning starts next year. So I think the decisions are sort of made for us on that.
But do we need as a hack to be pressing, expressing our voices on what that land use map should look at beyond what's in the housing plan? Or are we done with our voice on the land use map as a hack?
I think just to add, I think Dan Rosenwig and Sunshine, they've been pretty much engaged in that land use, future land use map, in terms of providing comments and feedback and engaging the consultant and the staff. So I would assume that both of them are representing a hack pretty much.
Yeah,
So
I mean, they essentially provided a revised map based on Sunshine's presentation to the hack a couple of months back and said, this is what we think this, and it was sort of a recommendation for change. So I think we're doing that, but I think in terms of advising the city as to what the priorities are, I think that for this purpose of this meeting and what our goal is, I think we're on the same. I think it's get the land use map approved by the end of the calendar year if you can, and then we got to start on zoning next year. And the rest of it is all of the results that follow from that. It's as far as I can.
Yeah, that's the city
I mean,
position right now.
You know,
Alex, are you suggesting that Sunshine and Dan are representing the hack?
No, I think the stuff they are sending, you know, I'm assuming that they are on the hack because it was presented to hack before, which is the overlay district for affordable housing, you know.
when that was presented to the hack agreed that this needed, that we were forwarding this as a hack general recommendation to the planning
Is there
commission.
anything additional that is going on? Because it sounds like Alex may be saying that they're continuing to engage. There's something else, Alex.
Yeah, I think they provided comments to the planning commission as part of the public comment period before the last planning commission meeting on 21st. So I'm assuming that those comments are in keeping with hack recommended suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, they presented the overlay map to the hack. The hack agreed that it needed to be presented and advocated for at the planning commission, and they have done that. And there's been some back and forth on how that, you know, on how it looks, but that's basically what they have done. But again, that's from the scale of this particular meeting, which is city, what do we think you should do in what order? We're back to the basics of let's get a map in place and then do our zoning, which is, I think, is sort of self-evident.
I would like to push back a little bit and follow up with what Alex said. If there's a continuous engagement and there's no conversation back to the hack, and I didn't agree to that, they're going to continuously unanimously represent the hack. We had a conversation and we agreed, we had conversation and we did agree to the last point. But if there's continuous going back and forth, why wouldn't the hack be aware of that? To see if there's different views that are being presented than what we initially agreed on. I just want clarity on this.
So let me see if I can provide some clarity on that.
Unanimous on, you know, on continuous going back and forth. Alex, is there anything additional other than you were here, you've been here for the hack meeting? Is there anything additional?
Yeah, I just want to respond. I was responding to a Ridge, you know, in terms of staying engaged. I'm like, I assume that the hack, based on their recommendation regarding overlay, affordable housing overlay, there has been engagement between Dan and the Sunshine with the consultant and staff. So my assumption is okay, because it's basically back and forth, like clarifications and stuff like that and comments. So I'm assuming that hack is still engaged through that back and forth communication between Dan, Sunshine, and the consultant.
And let me provide a little, neither of them are here and we're running out of time, but to be very brief about it, the consultants asked, hey, can you explain this map to us? And they said, sure. And then they held a conference to explain our policy so that the consultants understood, okay, this is the changes you want, this is what we're doing. But but neither one of them are here. They can sort of go into the details of those conversations because of open meeting rules. I did not participate in that particular meeting because that would have been 3 hack members discussing hack stuff. So we would have had to publicize, make it public. But having said that, so
That's why transparency is vital.
Yeah.
We all remain on the same page, especially when you say you're representing a group.
I do not disagree with you one bit. So we're out of time here. So tenants' rights recommendations is the last thing. I think that we're already sort of halfway through most of this. I mean, I'm not sure how we recommend it, but I mean, I don't know what to do with rent control, but
Well, some of these, particular rent control, we have to get a legislative authority from the state legislature. So you guys keep it in mind so that I think around December or November, that's when the city attorney usually requests departments to provide suggestions on their legislative priorities. So you guys may want to add this, any legislative grant of state that we need to enable implementation of these tenant rights. You may want to add that as something that will go beyond the fiscal year, and then we'll make sure that we get it to the city attorney, when they compile the legislative priority list.
so to summarize, Alex, if we're going to try to do this with the just cause evictions and the rent control, that's a one. It needs to be done now.
Yeah, you
If we're
can
gonna
put
try to
it
do
in
it for this.
now.
Yeah.
Then we keep it in mind when we compile it at the end of the year to the city attorney, because the city has a lobbyist. So
Right.
at the end of the year, we usually send our list to the city attorney.
Okay. And then the right to counsel, I think we've established.
Yeah.
So then, and then the developments receiving city assistance, I think that is in conjunction with the money actually going out the door. So that's a 2 or a 3, right? Right. Okay. And then the subsidy, we
Wait a
kind
minute,
of went.
so just cause eviction and rent control, you're saying those are 1 and 2?
No, those are 1 and 1, because if we're going to try to do it this year, we got to get it to, we got to get it in the legislative packet now.
And so right to counsel will be number 2, and developing and receiving assistance, you're saying is number 3?
No, I'm saying right to counsel. Haven't we established that? Haven't we funded for that? What's a right to counsel versus having the authority, having the resources? Alex?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think council
Funded, right?
acted on. I think council acted on it by providing funding to the legal aid center, didn't they?
The right to counsel?
Yeah.
Oh,
think
okay. I
Yeah,
double check.
that's done. So then developments for city of city, that's a 2 or a 3. That happens as the money comes out the door anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So the
Gotcha.
subsidy piece we covered
I'm
at the
not
last.
in agreement with rental control being number 1. Unless you can give me a better understanding of how that would work.
Okay. So the idea here is that if we're going to look at a rent control law, and we need one, right? If we're going to do that, if we're even going to attempt it, leaving alone whether it's a good policy or not, if we're going to try to get the authority for rent control, that has to get into the legislative packet now, because that's happening now. So these are things that if we're going to advocate for enabling legislation, and we're not going to punt for a year, we got to go now. Now,
I'll
this,
be on record opposing rent control.
okay.
Then you're starting to get into limiting owners' rights.
So what did you say, Lisa? You are opposed to rent control?
Yeah, I am, because then you're starting to get into the area of limiting homeowners' rights or the landlord's rights. Either we have the ability to help subsidize or incentivize the tenant or the homeowner, whoever is doing the renting, but limiting their ability to charge market value to their personal property, I'm not in favor of.
Okay.
And I'm on the other side of that coin. I think there needs to be some kind of rent control because of just how the affordability of rent is in the city of Charlottesville right now for people who are making a certain income. And so for me, trying to see what you can win, just because we present it doesn't mean we're gonna win it in the General Assembly, will be something that I entertain, so.
And if
Yeah,
we're
and-
going to work on issues, I think that the winnability of an issue should be a factor. I
Well,
don't
and-
want to win on it. I don't.
Yeah, well, and I mean, maybe that's the way we parse this, is that if there's any enabling legislation that you all really want to get in there now, now's the time, but they know that too. I mean, they know that. The city knows that. We're not telling them anything. They don't know. Okay, look, we are out of time. We are over time. So what I would like from all of you is that just take a look at those pages again.
Mhm.
And rank them up as best you can and send them to me. If you've got any specific comment, send them to me directly. I will try to synthesize it into a bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3 with comments on each, and circulate it back around to this committee to get everyone sort of to get a consensus that we're basically right. So if you all could do that to inform me in time to ruin my weekend, I'd appreciate that.
Are we gonna have, and I know you have to go, but is Sam gonna be in one of these meetings? Or are we gonna be
Yes.
meeting with?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely. I need to reconnect with him on that too.
okay.
So very quickly, since we're running out of bodies here too, is there anyone out in the universe by raising their hand who'd like to speak on any matter before this committee before we adjourn it late?
I'm just going to make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, having heard nothing from the public, I thought I'd give them 10 seconds. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okie dokie. Is there any objection? Having heard no objection, we stand adjourned. Homework by Friday, please, by Friday midnight. 1, 2, and 3 from those pages. Thank you very much and goodbye.